Namaskar and thanks for joining us here on News Night. Well, two international stories that stand out for perspective today are Hong Kong swearing in a chief executive who was handpicked by Beijing, who was elected unopposed, leaving much to be desired about the one nation, two systems concept. Also, how much has democracy been undermined in Hong Kong? And we'll also turn our attention to Israel, that's struggling to find political stability with the dissolution of parliament and the end of its 36th government. My name is Mark Lynn. Let's begin with the headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi speaks to President Vladimir Putin on the phone and discusses how bilateral trade in agricultural goods, fertilizers and farmer products can be encouraged. State of the international energy and food markets are also discussed. The Prime Minister reiterates India's long-standing position in favor of dialogue and diplomacy to end the Ukraine crisis. Ukraine signs a declaration of intent to join the European Union. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says that the EU membership is within reach, and she urges Ukraine to press ahead with anti-corruption reforms. 19 people killed in missile strikes on Odisha region. Russia starts shipping grain from territories in Ukraine under its control. Ukraine requests Turkey to detain a Russian-flagged ship carrying Ukrainian grain. Japan's energy situation remains fragile after President Vladimir Putin seizes Sakhalin-2 gas field, the main source of LNG for Japan, and Japan says that it still has 2 to 3 weeks of supplies and asks the US and Australian energy counterparts for alternative supplies. Prime Minister Narendra Modi congratulates Yair Lapid for assuming the premiership of Israel, and he thanks the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett for being a true friend of India. Yair Lapid responds by thanking the Prime Minister and describing India as an important partner and a close friend of Israel. John Lee is sworn in as the new chief executive of Hong Kong. President Xi Jinping defends China's rule at Hong Kong's Handover anniversary. Taiwan's premier says that freedom in Hong Kong has vanished. And the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson says that Britain would do all it could to hold Beijing to its commitments on democratic rights made 25 years ago. The European Union says that it may not be possible to cross the finish line on Iran nuclear deal and blames the American and Iranian diplomats for the failure to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. The United Nations urges Iran and the United States to build on recent momentum to reach a deal. The ban on single-use plastic items in India comes into effect from today. Delhi government announces a fine of up to 1 lakh rupees or a jail term for violation. The Jagannath Rath Yatra begins across the country after a gap of 2 years because of COVID pandemic. Let's begin with our top story. Prime Minister Narendra Modi had a telephonic conversation today with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the two leaders reviewed the implementation of the decisions taken during the President's visit to India in December of 2021. In particular, they exchanged ideas on how bilateral trade in agricultural goods, fertilizers and pharmaceutical products can be encouraged further. And the leaders also discussed global issues, including the state of the international energy and food markets. And in the context of the ongoing situation in Ukraine, the Prime Minister reiterated India's long-standing position in favor of dialogue and diplomacy, and the leaders also discussed they agreed to maintain regular consultations on global and bilateral issues. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has said that Ukraine has a very clear European perspective, and she said that the 27-member bloc will be with Ukraine on its long road to EU membership, which Zelensky has urged Ukrainian officials to work fast to accomplish. Now, Ukraine was granted candidate status, as we know, on June 23. But in another development, Ukraine has requested Turkey to detain and arrest a Russian-flagged cargo ship, the Zhepek, which is carrying cargo of Ukrainian grain taken from a Russian-occupied port of Berdyansk. Meanwhile, Russia also has replaced the Sakhalin-2 project operator, and a new firm has taken charge of the Sakhalin-2 gas and oil project in Russia's Far East. That's depriving Japan and other investors of their stake. More on the situation in Ukraine, and the Russian military operation there enters the 128th day. 128th.
The President of European Commission told Ukraine's parliament on Friday that Ukraine now has a very clear European perspective, but the road to EU membership will take time and require hard work. In a speech by video link to the Ukrainian Assembly, Ursula von der Leyen underlined the progress made by the country in its path towards EU membership. On his part, Ukrainian President Zelensky urged lawmakers to intensify work to join EU fast. Zelensky said that it took 115 days to get to the candidacy stage, and path to membership must not take decades.
Ukraine now has a very clear European perspective, and Ukraine is candidate country to join the European Union. Something that seemed almost unimaginable just 5 months ago. So today is first and foremost a moment to celebrate this historic milestone, a victory of determination and resolve, and a victory for the whole movement that started 8 years ago on the Maidan.
I urge all those holding government posts to see their duty, the work towards EU membership as frontline battle for our state, for Ukraine, for you and me. We have to work on preparations to join the EU with the same intensity and responsibility we put into preparing for the candidacy. The European Union flag will be brought into this hall.
European leaders on June 23rd had granted Ukraine the much coveted status of official candidate to join their 27-nation union in a bold geopolitical move hailed by Ukraine and the EU itself as a historic decision. In another development, Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Friday that political pressure from the West was pushing Russia to accelerate its integration with neighboring Belarus. Putin addressed participants of a forum on Russian and Belarusian regions currently underway in Grodno, a city in western Belarus near the border with Poland and Lithuania. The economic tit-for-tat over Ukraine deepened further after President Vladimir Putin signed a decree on Thursday to take charge of the Sakhalin-2 gas and oil project in Russia's Far East. Kremlin said on Friday that Russia sees no grounds for liquefied natural gas (LNG) supplies to stop from its Sakhalin-2 project after Moscow moved to create a new firm to take over all rights and obligations of the project. The decree signed on Thursday creates a new firm to take over all rights and obligations of Sakhalin Energy Investment Co., in which Shell and two Japanese trading companies, Mitsui and Mitsubishi, hold just under 50%. Japan imports around 6 million tons per year, or 10% of its LNG each year from Russia, mostly under long-term contract from Sakhalin-2. Even though the war has entered the 128th day, there seems no end in sight to stop war in Ukraine. On Friday, the war-torn country saw a missile attack in Odessa. Russian missiles struck an apartment building and 2 holiday camps near Ukraine's Black Sea port of Odessa early on Friday, killing at least 18 people and wounding dozens. Ukrainian authorities said missiles struck the building in the town of Belgorod, Dnipropetrovsk. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and lawmakers held a minute of silence to commemorate those killed in the Russian missile attack in the Odessa region. However, the Kremlin dismissed allegations that Russian missiles had struck an apartment building near the Ukrainian Black Sea port of Odessa early on Friday. Newsnight Desk, DD India.
Israel's parliament had voted to dissolve itself and send the country to polls in November for the 5th time in less than 4 years. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has congratulated Yair Lapid for becoming the Prime Minister, and he took over from Naftali Bennett. But the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has wished the new Prime Minister and looked forward to strengthening the strategic partnership as the two countries celebrate 30 years of full diplomatic relations. Prime Minister also thanked the former Prime Minister Bennett for being a true friend of India. And Prime Minister Lapid thanked Prime Minister Modi and said that India is an important partner and a close friend of Israel. He looked forward also to strengthening the special ties between the two countries.
This very special role and this state, it does not belong to the one person, it belongs to all the people of Israel. And I am passing to you this holy baton and the responsibility for the state of Israel, and I wish you that you will protect it and God will protect you.
And we will do our best for a good, strong, prosperous and democratic Jewish state, because that is the job and it is greater than any of us. Thank you, my brother.
Another change of guard in Israel. Months before elections in November, Yair Lapid officially became the 14th Prime Minister of Israel at the stroke of midnight between Thursday and Friday. The former amateur boxer turned political chat show host is effectively the caretaker Prime Minister. Following the vote to dissolve Parliament on Thursday, Yair Lapid, who has been Foreign Minister, took over because of his power-sharing deal with the right-wing nationalist Naftali Bennett, who was Prime Minister for the past year. On Twitter, Prime Minister Narendra Modi congratulated Yair Lapid for assuming the premiership of Israel. He said he looked forward to continue furthering India-Israel strategic partnership as both nations celebrate 30 years of full diplomatic relations. He also wrote, "Thank you, outgoing Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, for being a true friend of India." The Prime Minister said he cherished fruitful interactions and wished Bennett success in his new role. US President Joe Biden also congratulated Lapid for becoming the new Prime Minister. As Prime Minister, Yair Lapid will host US President Joe Biden when he visits Israel later this month. Yair Lapid will also address the UN General Assembly in September. Naftali Bennett will remain in the government as an alternate Prime Minister. He will also continue to hold responsibility for the country's Iran policy. Lapid and Bennett in June 2021 had formed an unlikely coalition after 2 years of political stalemate, ending the record reign of former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The government of right-wing, liberal and Muslim Arab parties was fragile from the start. With a razor-thin parliamentary majority and divided on major policy issues such as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and state and religion issues, the 8-faction alliance began to fracture when a handful of members abandoned the coalition. The government's parliamentary majority was soon lost, forcing early polls. Newsnight Desk, DD India.
Well, so that brings us to In Focus tonight. Israel in search of democratic stability is in focus tonight, and to discuss this we have with us Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti, former Secretary, Economic Relations of the Ministry of External Affairs, who served in Israel, and Dr. Meena Singh Roy, West Asia and Eurasia expert, who served as a West Asia expert in the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. Thank you very much, ma'am, and thank you, Ambassador Chakravarti, for being with us. We'll start with you, Ambassador Chakravarti. voters vote for parties in Israel, not for individuals, and the parties are largely identity politics based parties. So is there a way to move beyond this? Because that's why there are so many parties and so many identities, and it's not merging together.
Well, Israel chose after it became independent the system of proportional representation. So parties prepare lists and you vote for a party, then depending on the number of votes you get, you are allotted a certain number of seats, and in order of precedence in the list they become MPs. Now, Israel has had coalition governments for a very long time. I mean, there are a few instances where one party has ever enjoyed a majority.
Yes.
And they've always had to join hands with some party or the other. So, and they have been living within it and also battling the system in the sense that there is not much longevity to the governments that are formed through these coalition efforts. And Israel has had, I think, this will be the 6th election in 5 years.
Right.
So this is the problem of their politics. But that's how it is. So we have to manage within that. And that's what they are trying to do. But again, elections has been called in November, and let us see what will happen then. I don't foresee any one party,
Yes.
But it seems that this has provided another opportunity to former PM, Benjamin Netanyahu,
yes.
To maybe get another shot at the PM's job.
Sure. Dr. Roy, one of the suggestions that I was reading up, on suggestions for electoral reforms in Israel, it suggests that they should allow the leader of the largest Senate faction to become the prime minister and then work out a national government. Do you think that that has some, is a solution in some way?
Well, I think, we'll have to wait and see how things unfold. And given the uncertainty in past, one does come to a conclusion that there is a requirement of a stable government. If you see, this is the 5th time, that they will be having, elections in less than 4 years, actually. So it seems that, a very appropriate, suggestion in terms of looking at the stability. But let's hope that we see a more stable government, that is the flip side of the coalition government always, that, you have to keep all the partners together. So I think it's a good step, but we'll have to see how it unfolds.
Okay, it's just a suggestion anyway. But Ambassador Chakraborty, another suggestion is that they have to do away with the multi-party system because there are only 120 seats. I mean, you have so many parties and you're dividing such a small pie amongst many of them. Do away with it and have just a two-party system. After all, there are two poles. One is conservative and the other is progressive. So basically function like that.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think they can have a two-party system. I mean, look at India. Can we have a two-party system?
Ours is a huge country, and it suits us to have a multi-party system.
There are so many political views in Israel, despite it being a small country. And don't forget, there are over 1 million Arabs, Israeli Arabs, and they form different. Even within them, they have different parties. So it's a very fractious polity in that sense.
Yes.
And then there is the ultra-conservatives, then there are conservatives, the right wing, left wing, all kinds of parties are there because all kinds of ideologies prevail.
Right.
So to say that they should have a two-party system is, I think, wishful thinking. I don't think that's going to happen. And I think they are going to continue with whatever system they have, unless they can all get together and say, instead of the proportional system, let's have a first past the post system as we have in India.
Okay.
Well, I think once you win a seat, you kind of, it's not based on the list system, and you become an MP. You are personally attached to the constituency,
All right.
rather than being in a list of a party which has got a certain number of percentage of votes and been allotted a certain number of seats.
Dr. Roy, there are, in the last elections, the nationalist and the religious parties seem to be capturing a majority of the seats in the Senate. That's in the last 4 elections. So do you see a sort of a trend building up towards, the nationalist and the religious parties, and they could actually form a stable coalition?
Well, there are different news reports which are coming up from the Israeli media, and one does see that there could be possibility of former Prime Minister Netanyahu, getting closer to getting more seats, but will he or the party will be able to acquire that many majority of, say, 61 seats? That is what is the big question.
Right.
So we really don't know how things will flow in coming months.
Sure.
But there's also an opportunity, for the caretaker Prime Minister who would be, speaking to the U.S. President's visit, which is due this month. So we'll see as to how that goes as well.
Staying with you, Dr. Roy, there is one of the aims of the Yamina and the Yesh Atid-led coalition was to try and limit the Prime Minister's term to just 2 terms. So that would have ended Netanyahu completely if they were able to bring it in, because, he's been a 12-year Prime Minister with several terms. But the point is that, what do you think? Things like this are progressive in a way, and they would be very appealing to the political parties there?
Well, one thing that I would like to, sort of say here, that in real sense, you see the democracy unfolding in a country like Israel,
Okay.
You see how divided the people are, when it comes to voting. Otherwise, you wouldn't have, election 5 times, in 4 years. So, and there are, corruption charges against, President Netanyahu at the moment, which is on. But one also understands, given the geopolitical, major transition is happening when we look at the region as such. So internal political dynamics, is very, very connected to when it comes to Israel's security, when it comes to Israel's relations with the larger Arab world, and there are sea changes in that. But and the other point that I would like to highlight is the issue of security, the issue of sort of having the stable government. Let's see how it. I think any prediction would be very difficult to make.
We're trying to see how the system can change to build a stable government, because we've never seen a stable government there. It's affecting decision making. That's the basic idea. So, Mr. Ambassador Chakravarti, do you see goals and manifestos? If they work together, like for instance the recent coalition, even though it didn't last very long, they had a long list of goals that they were going to achieve, and and they brought together so many different parties: New Hope, Centre Left, Labour, Secular Right, all of them. So in that sense, they worked out something. And that, do you think these kind of things appeal to voters? Because they're going to go after all to the voter. The voter has to decide.
Well, it certainly would appeal to some sections, as we know. There's a lot of divisions, ideological divisions within Israel. So voters tend to vote as per their ideological inclination. But my sense is that if Netanyahu's party, which is the largest party, Likud, can get close to something like 40 seats, 45 seats, then he should be able to form a more stable coalition. Because there will be people who will be willing to join hands with him. But this current coalition, which is now fallen apart, was a very, very unlikely coalition. There were 8 coalition partners ranging from extreme left to the extreme right. And it was it was not made to last.
So that inherent contradictions. But they've had a, what we would call a common minimum program, and they seem to have been trying to implement it.
Yeah, they had one, but then, what happens after the election is that once the government is formed with such a coalition, then, bickering starts within the coalition. And this is what happened this time also.
Okay.
When some of the, a few members, in fact, of Naftali Bennett's party, Yamina, they refused to vote for this legislation, which would have renewed this particular legislation which applies to the West Bank and the Jewish settlements, etc.
Right.
So I think this is what happened, and then once the legislation fell through, and the government lost its majority, and so they had to find another solution, which is a caretaker government, and go for election.
Right. Dr. Roy, so we did talk a little bit about the instability causing a problem for decision making, and probably bad for a country like Israel, which is surrounded by what they would consider themselves as enemy states. So in this context, I mean, what do you think? I mean, the country is managing despite all this. Would you say that, you said that democracy is evolving, but how long will it take? I mean, 36 governments is what they've had already.
Well, when we talk about the problems in the region, which is so complex, and to say that how long will it take is not a very easy question to answer, number one. Number two, I do see, Israel, when you look at their normalization of the relations with the Gulf states and also with the some of the North African states. So there's a kind of a change which you could not have expected earlier. There's also a new narrative that we might see normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia as well. So regardless of what happens internally, and I think internally when it comes to the core issues of Israel, everybody is united. That is what I can guess. But I think this time probably we should see that there would be a better understanding of the coalition partners, and if the party headed by Netanyahu is able to get enough seats, and even if it is less, as Ambassador just said, that there could be other people who would be willing to join, because that's one of the feeling of nationalism and the national unity is something which the party claims, and I personally would feel that people are fed up voting 4 to 5 times, so hopefully it should be
so Ambassador Chakravarti, it's basically if the Likud party you claim, I mean, you say that it is the largest party and it's likely to continue in that sense, and but one of the reasons for the removal of Netanyahu is that he has been there for a long time, and there was an opportunity for Naftali Bennett and now for Lapid to try and show that they are prime ministerial material. What do you think? I mean, in this short span of time, could they have gained some sort of political capital?
I would think so. Anybody who sits on the PM's chair automatically gets some political capital. But as you know, Naftali Bennett has said goodbye to politics. He has announced that he will no longer be in politics and will go back to private life. So he is out of the equation for the moment till he changes his mind and comes back again. So I think what we are going to see this time is again a fight. Yair Lapid will be probably the main contender or the main opponent against Netanyahu. Because Netanyahu is still there, although he's fighting corruption charges and things like that. But he remains a popular political leader. and his party is certainly the largest, and will probably again get a large chunk of the votes. Depends on how much, because that will dictate again the terms of the next coalition government that will have to be formed.
Last question to you, Dr. Roy. I mean, would you think that, see, the relations between the US and Israel are so close. One wonders, whether different governments in the United States support different candidates in Israel. Is that the case, or they have bipartisan support for whoever comes to power?
I think they'll have a bipartisan support whosoever comes to the power. I mean, that is what I feel would be.
Okay. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Meena Singh Roy, West Asia expert, and Ambassador Pinakaranjan Chakrabarti for throwing light on the unusual situation of musical chairs, in a sense, in Israel that have been continuing for such a long time. Moving on then to our next story. China's President Xi Jinping oversaw a choreographed celebration to mark the 25th anniversary of Hong Kong's handover to Beijing amid a massive security presence. Xi Jinping arrived in Hong Kong a day earlier by high-speed train, but he spent the night in the neighboring mainland city of Shenzhen, and this was his first trip outside mainland China since the COVID pandemic. It's also his first to Hong Kong since 2017. And that's when he went on July 1st for the July 1st celebrations in 2017. That's the last time he reached there. More on this report.
Hong Kong marking the 25th handover anniversary. It's been 25 years since Britain returned the city to China. It's also the halfway point in Beijing's 50-year promise of a high degree of autonomy for the city under a framework known as One Country, Two Systems. The day also saw President Xi Jinping preside over the swearing-in of John Lee as the new chief executive of Hong Kong. President Xi described John Lee as a patriot. Lee was elected as leader of Hong Kong after winning an election held through a closed voting system. Lee was the only candidate running for the position.
The revision and improvement of Hong Kong's electoral system has ensured the implementation of the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong. In accordance with the principle of one country, two systems, it is conducive to safeguarding the democratic rights of Hong Kong residents.
The irony of President Xi's statement is lost on no one. The 2022 Hong Kong election that saw Lee winning was held a year after the city's electoral system was reformed. The new rules allowed China's ruling Communist Party to appoint more lawmakers to the election committee, reducing the share elected by the public and eliminating opposition voices. They drastically restricted the right of Hong Kongers to stand for election and reshape the city's legislature. They also expanded Hong Kong's legislature from 70 to 90 seats, reducing the overall percentage of democratically elected officials. 40 of those are now chosen by a newly empowered, mostly government-appointed election committee. Lee, 64, has long been known as a pro-Beijing supporter. He has been a law enforcement agent since 1977. Lee rose to become Secretary of Security in 2017. It was as Secretary of Security that he played a significant role in advocating the 2019 extradition bill that allowed for fugitives to be extradited to China as well as Taiwan and Macau. The bill sparked months of protests in Hong Kong, during which the police under Lee were criticized for using water cannons, tear gas and ammunition. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said on Thursday that Britain would do all it could to hold Beijing to its commitments on democratic rights made 25 years ago. In a video released by his office, Johnson said China had failed to comply with its commitment to respect one country, two systems agreement agreed under the deal that ended British colonial rule in 1997.
We simply cannot avoid the fact that for some time now, Beijing has been failing to comply with its obligations. It's a state of affairs that threatens both the rights and freedoms of Hong Kongers and the continued progress and prosperity of their home.
Taiwan's Premier Su Shen-chang also alleged freedom in Hong Kong has vanished and that one country, two systems has failed.
It's only been 25 years and the past promises of 50 years no change has disappeared, and even freedom and democracy have vanished. We also know that we must hold fast to Taiwan's sovereignty, freedom and democracy. China's so-called one country, two systems has simply not stood up to the test.
The Taiwanese Premier's statement rang true on the empty streets of Hong Kong. Shutters down, tight security amid flags all across the streets. That was the scene that met the eye. Authorities deployed a massive security force, blocking roads and airspace as Hong Kong, for the first time, marked the anniversary of its handover to China with no protest, opposition criticism, or homegrown expressions of dissent.
Since the last time that she was in Hong Kong in 2017, you now have the complete repression of any public showing of dissent. You have now a complete political purge and cleansing, where whatever the ceremony that Xi Jinping is attending, it is completely void of any representation of everyday Hong Kong.
So this is kind of the Hong Kong that Xi Jinping is coming to. Beijing is in control of everything. Now there's very little doubt in Hong Kong that there's a second government there.
In 1984, Deng Xiaoping successfully negotiated an agreement with the British government to return Hong Kong to Chinese rule in 1997. The Air Britain's 99-year lease on much of the territory was to expire. One country, two systems, conceived by Deng and then British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, was intended to let Hong Kong keep its free market economy and internationally respected legal system, with the exception of foreign affairs and defense. However, today, that clearly isn't what is playing out. China is backseat driving in Hong Kong. Newsnight Desk, DD India.
Well, the autonomy of Hong Kong is withering away, and the National People's Congress Standing Committee, that's China's top lawmaking body, it has the ultimate power of interpretation. And in 2020, the NPCSC, it passed a controversial national security law for Hong Kong. It criminalized secession, subversion, terrorism, or collusion with foreign forces. And that came after the 2019 protests, which saw violent clashes between protesters and the police. Now, this law has hushed political dissent. But there are other reasons as well, economic reasons too. Let's look at how Hong Kong's autonomy has been undermined. The interdependence has sapped Hong Kong's autonomy because Hong Kong is, as we know, a special administrative region. It's controlled by the People's Republic of China. Control, People's Republic of China. Limited autonomy under one country, two systems. Hong Kong's economy has low taxes, free trade, and less government interference. So that was what was keeping it going. But Chinese stock markets, they are conservative and restrictive. Hong Kong's was more open. However, China is controlled by a single party and Hong Kong has a limited democracy. These are some of the inherent differences. But the chief executive of Hong Kong is accountable to the central people's government. So in 2014, we know that this was the beginning of the fissures. So mass protests and demonstrations against the mainland China because they were trying to take away the freedoms of people. But protesters, they complained that the candidates aligned with China alone can run under the umbrella protest, in fact, was what happened. And that of 2014, they failed to achieve any concessions from Beijing. Beijing continued to, stamp its authority, and Hong Kong, as we know, has no military, so it can't fight back. China's military defends Hong Kong. Hong Kong has no separate diplomatic ties with foreign countries. It's the Chinese government that does that. So Hong Kong has independent finances, and the PRC doesn't seem to interfere with that. In fact, the Hong Kong dollar is pegged to the US dollar, and the mainland uses the Chinese yuan as legal tender. But here's the thing. Hong Kong's GDP per capita is higher than mainland China, but China's GDP growth has been huge in comparison to Hong Kong, which has been falling. So China has been growing, in fact, at 6%. The latest was in 2018, the figures that I have quoted here. And Hong Kong was just 2%. So coming down significantly, hence Hong Kong very dependent on China. Hong Kong's economic importance and relevance to China is rapidly falling. It doesn't even exist. So Hong Kong and mainland China have been boosting each other's economies. Hong Kong is heavily dependent on the Chinese economy. The annual bilateral trade was valued at over $562.5 billion in 2021. Hence, Hong Kong doesn't have enough independence to stand up to mainland China. And that's basically what the story is. However, they were supposed to have this kind of autonomy till 2047. It seems to have gone by 2022, much earlier than the scheduled time. We'll move on then to our next story. And our next story is about European brokered efforts to revive the Iran nuclear deal, which is expected to restart once the US President Joe Biden visits the Middle East this month. An intense round of talks in Doha failed to overcome differences. A 2015 agreement offered Iran sanctions relief, including on oil exports, in return for curbs to its enrichment activities and intrusive International Atomic Energy Agency inspections as well. So the US, we know, had pulled out of these talks in 2018 when Donald Trump was the president, and they had reimposed sanctions. But Biden, he wants to restart the process, but he's failed to do so far.
Major Western powers wrung their hands at American and Iranian diplomats' failure to revive a 2015 nuclear deal, with the European Union saying it might not make it over the finishing line. Diplomats spoke at the UN Security Council one day after indirect US-Iran talks ended in Doha, with no sign of progress on resurrecting the pact under which Tehran limited its nuclear program in return for relief from US, UN and EU sanctions. The EU coordinates the talks on resurrecting the agreement, which then US President Donald Trump renegated on in 2018 and restored harsh US sanctions on Iran, prompting Tehran to start violating its nuclear restrictions about a year later. Chinese and Russian diplomats faulted the United States, with Beijing's representative urging Washington to ease unilateral US sanctions on Iran and Russia's calling for all sides to show flexibility.
Together with the Secretary General, I therefore urge the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States to quickly mobilize in the same spirit and commitment to resume cooperation under the JCPOA.
On the EU side, we are concerned that we might not make it over the finishing line. Our message is seize this opportunity to conclude the deal based on the text that is on the table.
The Security Council met to discuss the latest report by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on the implementation of a 2015 Council resolution that enshrines the nuclear deal, formally called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Iran, however, described the latest talks as positive and said it was ready to strike an agreement.
Iran is committed to multilateral diplomacy, the outcome of which should assure the effective and verifiable lifting of all unlawful sanctions. Iran has demanded verifiable and objective guarantees from the US that JCPOA will not be torpedoed again, that the US will not violate its obligations again, and that sanctions will not be reimposed under other pretexts or designations, as occurred during the previous US administration. We were sincere in the Doha talks that were serious and positive. As in the past, we will be in touch with the EU coordinator for the next stage of the talks. Our negotiating team is ready to engage constructively again to conclude and reach a deal.
In 2018, the then US President Donald Trump pulled out of the deal under which Iran agreed to curb on its nuclear program in return for relief from economic sanctions. The US withdrawal and its re-imposition of crippling sanctions prompted Iran to begin violating its core nuclear limits about a year later. Western powers fear Iran is getting closer to being able to produce a nuclear bomb if it decided to, though Iran says its intentions are entirely peaceful. Bureau Report, DD India.
Wall Street's main indices, they opened lower on Friday, starting the second half of the year on a dull note after Thursday's dramatic fall. We bring you more on this and other stories that are making headlines around the world.
US stocks stumbled on Thursday, setting up the S&P 500 worst for its first half in more than half a century. All three major US stocks indices finished the month and the second quarter in negative territory, with S&P 500 notching its steepest first half percentage drop since 1970. Nasdaq had its largest ever January-June percentage drop, while the Dow suffered its biggest first half percentage plunge since 1962. All three indices posted their second straight quarterly declines. The last time that happened was in 2015 for S&P and Dow and 2016 for Nasdaq. Turkish president, while addressing media in Istanbul on Friday, said that the country could re-export grain products like wheat, oat and barley from Black Sea to countries in need. After talks with Russia and Ukraine, Turkey has played a central role in negotiations with Russia and Ukraine to try and reach an agreement that would allow for increase in the amount of grain that can get out of Ukraine amid the conflict. Protesters gathered in front of Russian embassy in Sofia on Friday to demonstrate against the government's decision to expel the Russian diplomatic staff. Bulgaria, an EU and NATO member state and once a close ally of Russia, has been roiled by diplomatic tensions after outgoing Prime Minister Kirill Petkov announced the expulsion of 70 Russian diplomatic staff on espionage concerns. Russia's ambassador to Bulgaria, Eleonora Milfanova, said on Friday she would ask Moscow to close its embassy in the Balkan country. French President Emmanuel Macron met on Friday with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in Paris in an effort to repair relations between the two countries after a diplomatic spat over a cancelled submarine deal. In October 2021, France accused its allies of betrayal when Australia opted for nuclear-powered submarines to be built with US and British tech instead of multi-billion-dollar French submarine program. The decision caused a major bilateral rift. In Sri Lanka, hundreds of supporters of country's main opposition party, Samagi Jana Balvegaya, gathered outside the main rail terminal in commercial capital Colombo to demand resignation of government of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Demonstrators accused Rajapaksa of being responsible for the worst economic crisis. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka's government proposed amending the constitution to trim presidential powers and beef up anti-corruption powers to help shore up stability and diffuse unrest. Telecom operators in Pakistan issued a warning that mobile and internet services could be shut down due to nationwide power outages. The power outages often are longer than 12 to 14 hours and lead to suffering of citizens due to sweltering heat waves. Pakistan National Information Technology Board shared the information via a tweet, which was later removed. Pakistan is facing an escalation of its power crisis after it failed to agree on a deal for natural gas supply next month. In US, suspected driver of Texas truck mishap appeared before the federal court in San Antonio. The charges of death have been leveled against truck driver Homero Zambrano Jr. and if convicted, he could face a maximum sentence of life imprisonment or death penalty and a fine up to $250,000. North Korea claimed that the country's first COVID outbreak began with patients touching alien things near the border with South Korea. Meanwhile, South Korea's Unification Ministry said there was no possibility of the virus entering the north through leaflets sent across the border. Ecuador's government and indigenous group leaders reached an agreement to end more than 2 weeks of protests against social and economic policies of President Guillermo Lasso. As part of deal with the government agreed to again lower fuel cost, including on the most used gasoline and diesel by an extra 5 cents following previous cuts of 10 cents per gallon. Lasso also offered to scrap a decree for oil projects and reform a similar one for mining projects. Thousands of pilgrims started arriving in the holy city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia on Friday. Among some 1 million Muslims expected to attend the 2022 Hajj pilgrimage season. Saudi Arabia, home to Islam's holiest sites in Mecca and Medina, allowed back foreign travelers this year to perform the Hajj.
So as the ban on identified single-use plastic items kicks in from Friday in our country, an enforcement campaign via control rooms will be initiated at the national as well as the state levels to close down units which are engaging in the production, distribution and stocking of such items. Now, according to the CPCB, India generates around 2.4 lakh tons of single-use plastic items per annum. Norway and Denmark on Friday had welcomed Prime Minister Narendra Modi's decision to ban single-use plastic items in India.
Of July could be considered as a moment in Indian history. On 1st of July, Indian government banned the single-usage plastic and its impact can be seen in many places. The decision in this regard has been taken in pursuance of its global climate goals to prevent its harmful effect on the environment. The notification to phase out 19 single-use plastic items by July 1st, 2022 was issued in August 2021 under the Environment Protection Act, and any violation will invite punitive action. According to Central Pollution Control Board, India generates 2.4 lakh tons of single-use plastics per annum. Earbuds with plastic sticks for balloons, plastic flags, candy sticks, ice cream sticks, polystyrene which is thermocol for decoration, plastic plates, plastic cups, plastic glasses, plastic cutlery such as forks, spoons, knives, straw, trays, wrapping or packaging film around sweet boxes, invitation cards, cigarette packets, plastic or PVC banner less than 100 micron and stirrers.
I think it's a great idea. I'm the Danish ambassador. I was born in the age of plastic fantastic. Today I have no taste for waste. So India is moving fast, and what India contributes by banning single-use plastic bags of today is a great contribution, a great gift to this planet. So I congratulate India. You have to move. You have to be good, great and green.
This will reduce the amount of plastic that ends up in nature and in the oceans, and it will also reduce the amount of plastic that needs to be collected and recycled. And what we have done here at the embassy today is that we have decided to eliminate single-use plastic items on our premises, including some that are not on the list in India, like plastic bottles.
The ministry notification also said that for the effective enforcement of ban on the identified single-use plastic items, national and state control rooms will be set up. Despite the growing cost of waste management, more single-use plastic items are being churned out annually. According to a study, the global plastic production reached 311 million tons in 2014 and is expected to quadruple by 2050. 40% of plastics produced are used for packaging, of which Asia contributes nearly 50%. An estimated 150 million tons of plastic garbage are actually floating in our waters, harming species and altering the marine ecosystem. Therefore, by prohibiting these plastic items, the government can reduce plastic waste production. We decided to do a reality check on the 19 plastic items that were banned by the government of India in one of Delhi's busiest marketplace.
हम लोग सारे शिफ्ट हो रहे हैं अब डिस्पोजेबल्स जो हम लकड़ी के चम्मच और पेपर बैग्स वगैरह पे शिफ्ट हो चुके हैं.
Everybody wants to move, सबको सस्टेनेबल लिविंग करना है एंड सिंगल यूज प्लास्टिक गवर्नमेंट ने अच्छा डिसीजन लिया है. धीरे धीरे करके मे बी हम इंडिया को we'll move towards a good sustainable living.
Most of those people were absolutely for this particular ban, though they said that it is important to increase the manufacturing of the alternate use of single-use plastic. With camera person SV Venkatesh, this is Taposh Bhattacharya for DD India, Delhi.
Indeed, there's always an opportunity cost. I wish all the stuff that has already been put into the atmosphere can be recycled in some way. The country continues to witness a steady rise in GST collections, and the gross GST revenue collected in the month of June 2022 is 144,616 crore rupees. The gross GST collection in June 2022 is the second highest collection next to the April 22 figure, which was 167,540 crore rupees. So the revenue for the month of June 2022 is 56 times higher than the GST revenues for the same month in the last year, which was 92,800 crore rupees. So addressing the 5th GST Day celebrations in New Delhi, the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said that there has been a steady increase in GST collections, and she also said that 1.4 lakh crore rupees is the rough bottom line that the monthly GST collections should be. It should not go below that. And this is the 5th time that the monthly GST collections have crossed 1.4 lakh crore rupees since the inception of GST, and the 4th month at a stretch, in fact, since March.
GST revenue collection for the month of June 2022 is 1,44,616 crores. 56% rise of the GST revenues in the same month last year. 56%.
The Jagannath Yatra, also known as the chariot celebration of Lord Jagannath, Devi Subhadra and Lord Balabhadra, has begun in Puri in Odisha, and devotees in large numbers from across the country, they've congregated in Puri to attend the Jagannath Rath Yatra. And the participation of devotees in the Rath Yatra, these devotees have been allowed this year after a gap of 2 years following the COVID pandemic. This festival is being celebrated in many other parts of the country as well. Gujarat, for instance, the Rath Yatra of Lord Jagannath commenced in Ahmedabad amid tight security as lakhs of devotees from across the state, they flocked the route to catch a glimpse of the deity and also witness this procession. Before the commencement of the Rath Yatra, the Home Minister Amit Shah performed the Mangala Aarti of the deities at a temple in the early hours. Wimbledon news now. A shock exit for the Greek fifth seed Maria Sakkari, which got defeated by Tatjana Maria of Germany 3-6, 5-7. After losing the first set to Maria, Sakkari in fact raced into a 3-love lead in the second set, but slowly but surely she allowed Maria back into the set, and when the German winning the last 3 games and wrapped up the victory. Tatjana Maria will now play Elena Ostapenko in the 4th round. And Tunisia's third seed, Onas Jabeur, beat France's Daniel Perry 6-2, 6-3. The third seed, Onas Jabeur, has claimed a second successive break and is through to the 4th round in this in a swift hour and 7 minutes. Well, we leave you with this unique hybrid developed by a UK startup, and it hopes to bridge the gap between cars and bikes and make electric motoring more affordable. Take a look. Good night. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.
The vehicle's battery sits in the nose of the bike. It's so small